Ferrari left Baku with more questions than answers. Did an electrical failure destroy the Leclerc engine? Hamilton already regrets having left Mercedes? And the most worrying, has the Scuderia abandoned the development of her car just 3 races from the start of the championship? The Azerbaijan Grand Prix was more than a bad result. It was a public exhibition of the structural fragilities that the Scuderia drags for years, now amplified by the pressure of having a 7-time world champion in their ranks. Baku, a high-speed urban circuit, represented an ideal technical challenge to measure the true competitiveness of the SF25, and also an opportunity to consolidate the Ferrari-Hamilton project. But what happened was the opposite. The day began with promising signs. In Friday's free training, Lewis Hamilton marked the best time for the first time since you saw red. It was no accident. The team had worked intensely in the correlation between simulator and track, and found a performance window in which the car seemed to behave predictability. That raised internal expectations. Ferrari believed for the first time in the season that he had a real opportunity to fight in the front. However, this trust was, in reality, an illusion built on a sand base. The classification revealed the first symptoms of collapse. Hamilton failed to translate his rhythm of practices into a competitive return, being out of the fight for the first 2 rows. Leclerc, finer on a return, also suffered to find grip in the slow sectors, where the SF25 began to show its worst face, an unpredictable traction car with a tendency to overheating rear tires and extremely sensitive to wind changes. Even so, the real disaster was reserved for the race. From the same moment the lights went out, Ferrari's plan crumbled. Charles Leclerc reported a loss of power as soon as the competition initiated. The deficit, later confirmed by the equipment, was 2 kilowatts, which translates into a loss of about 3 kilometers per hour in lines. In Baku, a track where it accelerates to the maximum for more than 60% of the lap, that difference is not a nuance. It is a sentence. Leclerc could not defend himself or attack. The overtaking were inevitable, and the chances of adding important points evaporated before reaching the first stop. The wall's response was slow and messy. While the engineers tried to understand the nature of the problem that curiously disappeared in the last part of the race without clear explanation, strategic decisions fell into an already known pattern: late, conservative, and poorly executed. Instead of risking undercut or settings in the engine mapping, the team chose to stay in a rigid plan, which did not adapt to the changing situation of track and traffic. That lack of flexibility ended up sinking Leclerc, who ended in a 9th position that did not reflect his level, but Ferrari's internal chaos. Hamilton, meanwhile, lived a parallel race. After a clean beginning, he was the victim of an ineffective strategy that left him stagnant on a DRS train. The SF25, already limited in peak speed, became ineffective to attack. The British pilot tried to modify his driving style to compensate for the lack of grip in the hard compounds, but the adjustments were late. His 8th place was not only insufficient at points, but also represented a lost opportunity to cement his influence within the team. The truly worrying was the post-carrier atmosphere. Internally, engineers recognized that SF25 has limitations that cannot be resolved without redesigned key components. The scheduled update, a new background, was discarded at the last moment, a clear sign that the car is not only poorly conceptualized, but is already considered a failed project at this point of the year. The priority has moved around 2026, and that leaves Ferrari in a dangerous situation, competing a full season with a car that has already been abandoned by its own team. The Baku Grand Prix was more than a bad career. It was a brutal mirror in which Ferrari saw his reality without filters, an organization divided between historical expectations and technical realities, between the symbolic weight of having Lewis Hamilton and the chronic inability to give him a competitive car. And all that just a few weeks after reaching one of the most demanding circuits of the calendar, Marina Bay. All this acquires even more seriousness when it is taken into account that Ferrari has redirected its resources to the 2026 car, which will be developed under a new technical regulations. That implies that from now on, any improvement in SF25 will be superficial or logistic. The car structure will not change. In essence, Ferrari is competing in a full season with a car that has already been abandoned by its own designers. It is a tacit admission of failure. Marina Bay has never been indulgent. It is one of the most demanding circuits of the Formula One calendar, not only for its technical and narrow layout, but for the extreme conditions in which it runs. High temperatures, suffocating humidity, a surface that constantly evolves over the weekend, and a physical demand that leads the pilots to the limit. But what truly turns the Singapore Grand Prix into a definitive test is not only resistance, but its strategic implacability. Any weakness, however minimal, is exposed in Marina Bay. For Ferrari and the SF25, this circuit represents a sentence. Demonstrate if there is something rescued from the project, or confirm that 2025 will be another year buried in the shadows. Ferrari's car, as already clear in Baku and previously in Melbourne, suffers particularly in urban stages. And Singapore is at its expression. The short braking areas, the need for precise traction in slow curves and thermal stress on the brakes and tires form a perfect cocktail to unmask a poor balanced car. The SF25, which has already shown problems to maintain consistency in intermediate temperatures, must face here a track whose operational window is extremely reduced and that hardly punishes any setup error. But the problem is not just technical. Ferrari pressure has reached a critical point. After the fiasco in Azerbaijan, both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc face a fragmented internal environment. The British, although more serene in his speech, has suggested that the car is not responding to his piloting style, and that the adaptation has been more complicated than he and the team provided for. Hamilton can no longer afford more weekends in which his performance is committed to erratic strategic decisions or an unpredictable car. Singapore then becomes not only a test for Ferrari, but a leadership exam for him. Its ability to manage pressure, refine the car in adverse conditions and maximize each available performance fragment will define its role within the equipment for the rest of the year. Leclerc, on the other hand, loads with a different weight. Meet the SF25 better than anyone, but that familiarity has also brought frustration. He has witnessed the technical stagnation of the team, of the wasted opportunities, and how its performance is diluted every time Ferrari faces a circuit that requires adaptation and flexibility. In Singapore, you will need not only pure rhythm but tactical vision. It is no longer enough to be fast. It must be intelligent. You must anticipate the errors of the wall and, if necessary, disobey orders that compromise your career. The challenge will be double. Deal with the limitations of the car and with the internal tensions that have been accentuated since the arrival of Hamilton. In addition, there is a latent threat that could end up sinking Ferrari's weekend: a grille penalty. Leclerc's power unit was committed to Baku after the loss of intermittent power, and if Maranello engineers decide to replace it as a precaution, the Monegasque driver will have to start from the bottom in one of the most difficult circuits to advance. Marina Bay is not Monza. Here, each position is won with surgical precision, and a bad Saturday can condemn any ambition before Sunday begins. In terms of strategy, Singapore's career is usually unpredictable. Safety cars' probabilities are high. Stop windows are narrow and tire degradation is difficult to predict due to the constant evolution of the track. The most successful teams here are those who know how to adapt their decisions in real time, and that has historically been the Ferrari Achilles heel. Simulation tools have not given consistent results and career communications remain plagued with doubts, delays and contradictions. In a circuit that demands clarity and reactivity, Ferrari arrives with one of the worst operational records of the grille. This weekend will be decisive. Not so much for the points but for what it will represent symbolically. If Ferrari fails in Singapore, the season will be divided into two, before and after the total collapse. It will be the definitive sign that the Scuderia has lost control of the present and only clings to the future promises of 2026. But if, on the contrary, they manage to squeeze the maximum of the SF25 and achieve a result that returns the illusion, it could mean a mood turning point for a team that, for years, lives trapped between the nostalgia and the potential breached. In this scenario, the pilots are trapped in a paradox. Hamilton arrived in Ferrari with the intention of closing his career at the top, of writing a last glorious chapter in his legacy. But what has been found is a team that has not yet resolved the structural contradictions that it has been dragging for more than a decade. His experience, his talent, his ability to adapt, all that is being wasted in a project without short-term projection. In each interview, his speech has gone from enthusiasm contained to diplomatic moderation. Body language is revealing. Hamilton no longer leads with confidence, but with strategic resignation. Leclerc, on the other hand, lives an even more delicate situation. It has been the visible face of the project for years, the renewal symbol, Maranello's prodigal son. But with the arrival of Hamilton, its symbolic status has been diluted. Now he shares responsibility but not the narrative. And if the results do not accompany him, his position within the team weakens. At the sports level, the Monegasque pilot faces the threat of being trapped in a kind of competitive limbo. Not strong enough to lead an internal revolution, but too valuable to be discarded. Singapore, and whatever comes later, will be key to defining if your relationship with Ferrari remains firm or begins to fracture.